you'll receive an update on the 990 IRS form for Church Militant and St. Michael's Media for 2022. Many donors have asked for updates on the current financial conditions as best as possible for Church Militant. Along with the update, we feel it's important to offer some education on what to look for in a financially healthy nonprofit versus an unhealthy one. This will help you do your due diligence for future nonprofits you may wish to donate to. Christine Chrisley will be able to help you understand what to look for and when to be alarmed. Welcome, Christine. It's so good to have you back.
Oh, thank you so much, Christine. It's so kind of you to invite me back.
Okay, so where do we start, Christine?
If we're going to help people stand the 990 and kind of demystify it, let's start by showing them where they themselves can find the 990. So you can find it, where you were looking at it. Why don't you go ahead and show them that? You might start with ProPublica. And I say that only because it's a little more straightforward. But there are advantages to going directly to the IRS, which we can talk about. But let's go to ProPublica first.
Okay. All right, there we are, Christine. This is St. Michael's Media. It's their 990 for the year ending December 2022. So let's go through this one first.
Yeah. So let's, first of all, let's just notice a couple of things. It's a little bit hard for me to see, but I want to say it is line number 2. So let me say, first of all, the very first page of the 990 is a summary page. And the entire document is in sections. And each section has lines. So, of course, it's just like, the tax return you and I file. There are sections and lines within each section. So let's look at section or at line 2. Oh, I'm sorry. It's I. So line I, it shows that St. Michael's Media is a 501c3. Okay. Now that's important because you'll notice there are other options there. And we're going to see that in a little bit. But that's the first thing to notice. It's a 501c3.
And it still shows the onetruefaith.tv as their website.
Interesting. Because if you go there, there's nothing there. Yeah. I don't know why they would do that. So the next section is the summary is part 1 of the summary section. And it has some interesting information in it. So for example, line 5 shows the number of employees at Church Militant. As of the end of 2022, they had...
It's 53 employees, but they also show employees on Church Militant too. And we've never been able to figure out who falls into St. Michael's Media as employees and who falls into Church Militant as employees, correct?
Oh, yes. I'm sure that goes, will be interesting to see. That was something that I didn't notice when I was looking at the return from Church Militant. So you see that at that time, there are, more than 50 employees. It's probably not good to view a 990 in isolation. You want to look at a couple of years because, for one thing, you can see if the number of employees has grown or increased or decreased. In this case, I'm guessing that at the end of December 2022 was potentially one of the very high points of employment at Church Militant. Maybe more 6 months prior. There might have been closer to 60, but of course, that's not how many there are now. So the next section, of course, is called revenue, right?
Yes.
Okay, now the thing to point out here is that there are two columns. You can see there are two columns, the prior year and the current year. It's really a handy way to quickly compare increases and decreases in revenue and expenses. So you can see that St. Michael's Media was about a $5 million operation in 2022. And notice there are two, so let's look more carefully at the revenue source. So the very first line is contributions. Okay, we all know what that is. Those are charitable gifts that are tax deductible for Church Militant. And they had about, right at like $3.4 million in the current year. Their revenue actually had gone down from 2021, it looks like. And then it says program service revenue. I'm not sure what revenue that is. To maybe get a better understanding, what I did was I just Googled that term, program service revenue. I just Googled it to see what it was. And it's things like fees for events, so or services. Some nonprofits offer services. Could potentially be income from the retreat at sea, faith and honor. So it could be that, but that's a lot of money. And it could be the bookstore, sales from the bookstore. Maybe. I'm not sure. One thing we know, it's not premium subscriptions. Now, how do we know that? Well, notice it tells you to go to part 8, line 2G.
There it is, 2G.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so actually, there's not much help there. It just repeats again, program service revenue, and it gives the business category. If you go to Church Militant, to their 990, now you can see that it's premium, that for Church Militant, they had revenue of 1.7 million from premium subscriptions. So we know that that's where they're counting all the funding from premium subscriptions. That's all going to the 501c4, which is not a charitable organization. It's a nonprofit, but gifts to that, but it's not tax deductible.
Okay. For the same year, ending 2022, they show 27 employees for Church Militant. I don't understand it.
I guess what they're doing is they're double counting, which probably isn't. I mean, they would probably say, well, part of the time this editor was working on Church Militant things, and another part of the time he was working on St. Michael's Media.
Oh, yeah, that could be right. And they do show the website as Church Militant on this one.
Oh, that is fascinating.
Yeah, I don't know why the difference.
Yeah.
But it looks like their contributions and their program service,
it ends up being, let's see,
they took a dive on both years for contributions and program service revenue.
So the question would be, where is Church Militant getting contributions from?
Mm-hmm.
Who's giving to Church Militant and not getting a charitable deduction? Who's funding those activities? And because it's a 501c4, they do not have to disclose who their donors are. Now, one thing, it could be that part of their contributions are actually gifts from St. Michael's Media. So it could be that St. Michael's Media is giving money to the 501c4. In other words, they're getting in charitable gifts, and then they're passing them on to the 501c4 for the more civic good, the general good that 501c4s are supposed to be engaging in, where you can do lobbying, more kind of lobbying kind of activities.
Well, the other thing I'd like to draw your attention to is they show total fundraising expenses 343,901. That's not very good for fundraising.
It's not very much money at all.
Yeah. And then, Christine, I want to draw your attention to line 19, revenue less expenses. So it looks like they were in the black in 2021, having around 550,000, but it looks like they're in the red for 2022 in the hole by, a $500,000.
Right now, we're on Church Militant right now,
Yes.
right?
So
Okay.
you want to go back to
Yeah.
St. Michael?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, let's do that. The only reason we switched was just to show that revenue, that part of the revenue for St. Michael's Media is not premium subscriptions. Okay, so let's go to that summary page, the very first page. And one of the things that I wanted to point out to people is I'm no tax expert at all. Most of us are fairly familiar with these sort of things just from filing our own taxes and so on. So I'm just encouraging our audience, when you're interested in knowing more about a nonprofit organization, don't let this 990 form intimidate you. We're just going to go through it now, and you'll see that it's fairly straightforward. So let's go back to the revenue side. Under revenue, we see that they have a total of about $5 million in both years. I mean, it's almost identical, pretty stable there, revenue-wise. They had a little more income from their program service revenue, whatever that was. All right, but let's go down to and look at expenses. Go down to line 19 under expenses, revenue less expenses. In other words, are they operating at a deficit? And we can see that for the last 2 years, St. Michael's Media has been operating at a deficit. That surprised me.
Surprises me that they have a total expenses of over $5 million. Now I get that 3 million is salaries, other expenses they're about even each year, just a little over 2 million. That's crazy that they were in the red for both years.
Yeah, operating at a deficit. And so again, it's so helpful that this form shows 2 years in a row. So you can see, oh my goodness, they are, for 2 years, they have been operating at a deficit.
What is the net assets or fund balance? That's just right below.
Yeah.
What is that? Because that's pretty even too.
But their net assets, I would believe, would be, the property they own.
Okay.
Yeah. So
things like that.
Yeah, their buildings and so on.
Okay.
So there are reasons why they might be operating at a deficit. Just because an organization in 1 year is operating at a deficit doesn't necessarily mean, oh my gosh, they don't know what they're doing. It's not necessarily a bad thing. For example, Church Militant might be operating at a deficit because they had a really big roof problem 1 year. They just took a big hit on their roof. And then another reason that they may be operating at a deficit is because, they got hit or they made the decision to take on the city of Baltimore. They had these unexpected legal expenses. Okay, it wasn't going to be an ongoing expense, although it turned out it has been, sort of a long haul. But my point is, it was a one-time sort of thing. It's not like they have expenses. They're just not managing how to spend their money or that sort of thing. They've maybe had some unexpected things happen, but they did make the decision to take on that lawsuit. So, so it's troubling that they are operating at a deficit. Another thing I wanted to point out what was on the revenue side. Could you go back up to the revenue? On the revenue side, notice line 10 under revenue, investment income. Okay, it's zero. St. Michael's Media had zero investment income. Of course, that would be the case. If they're operating at a deficit, that means they owe money. It's not like they have money in reserve. They owe money. Okay.
How typical is it for nonprofits to have investment income, Christine?
Well, the organizations I worked for, that was a very big deal. I mean, they had investment income. You know, they had endowments. You know, they had cash reserves to cover operations. You know, there was just all kinds of investment income. Yeah.
So would you say that's something that donors should look for when they're reviewing the 990s, is go right to investment income and see if they are, they are investing?
You know, it's a good question. So let's say that you were supporting an organization that fed hungry children in some foreign land. And you look at their 990 and they have, you know, millions of dollars in investment income, but they're supposed to be feeding hungry children. You would probably be troubled by that.
Got it.
Like,
yeah, good point.
Why are we not feeding the hungry children? Plus, I once was involved with an organization. It was a little Bible college. And they had the philosophy of no, they would not establish endowment. And their thinking was they wanted to rely on God to provide for them year by year.
Oh.
They didn't want to, and they wanted to spend what came in year by year. They didn't want to have, you know, this big endowment set aside so that they didn't have to rely on God at all. They just had that income and could just go about their merry way, which is exactly what places like Harvard does. I mean, they don't need anybody to give another dime ever again, and they're just fine. So it's a little bit of a tricky, it's maybe more controversial and nuanced than you might think, but to have nothing in cash reserves and to be operating at a budget, at a deficit, it's certainly not good from an employee perspective.
Right. I could see why, because if they had something unexpected that's catastrophic that could occur, that could automatically cause layoffs, correct?
Exactly. And you want to know that that the organization is being managed in a way that makes sense. And if they've got a big surplus, the same token, if you're an employee and they end the year with a big surplus, but they've been very stingy with, raises and so on, you might want to think about that too.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good point. So were there any red flags other than the investment income? They were operating in a deficit. Anything else that just caught your eye?
Well, the other thing that caught my eye was when they filed, so look at the signature line down at the bottom.
All right. So,
okay, so there's some actually great information here. So they filed on, we don't know actually when it got put in the mail, but the date on here is November 8th. That's the earliest it might have been filed, which seems pretty late. You can get extensions for all kinds of things. I really don't know if that date triggers a penalty or not, but it is very late. And it means that nobody gets to see this for an entire year, you know. So nobody is aware of what happened to St. Michael's Media in 2022 until pretty much now, 2024. So we're a year away. So 12 months have passed. And based on what we've seen here, what do you think we'll see a year from now when we see the 2023? Yeah,
Well,
we're going to see a huge reduction in employees. We're going to see a huge reduction in revenue and expenses. I mean, it's going to be a completely different picture, right?
yes, absolutely. What did what did St. Michael's Media do right on this form?
I'm assuming all the numbers are right.
Well, here's a question I have.
Yeah.
I just saw this.
Yeah.
Number of independent voting members of the governing body is 1.
Yep.
Would that be Mark?
Yep.
Okay.
Mark Lazard. Yeah.
Okay. Why would he be an independent voting member?
Because he is not an employee.
But all the other what number is that typically?
Well, you would want all of them to be independent.
Okay. You would want all of them to be independent. And we only have 1 in 2022 that was not an employee of Church Militant, which in itself is a real problem, folks. As Christine and I have said on another video, that, you know, all the board members were Church Militant employees except for Mark. That is a real problem. You really want local businesses to be on the board that have experience of being on the board. So
yeah, and they don't have to be local. I mean, people can fly. I mean, like big universities, the board members fly in from all over the country. So it doesn't have to be local people. It's nice if several of them are. But
well, would that be at the expense of the nonprofit to fly them in, or would that be at the expense of the board member?
The board member.
Okay.
Yeah, typically they're going to pay. But of course, you know, that means that you have board members who can afford to do that.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
But you know, I'm glad you pointed this out, Christine, because, you know, this number, the number of independent voting members, that's not buried somewhere deep in the bowels of this form, you know, pages of, no, it's one of the first things that they look at, that, you know, they ask. It is about the number of board members and how many are independent. I mean, I think that in itself suggests its importance.
Yes, it's right up front, isn't it?
Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right.
It's just very important. Yeah.
Where else should I go in this?
Well, let's just scroll through and look at the sections. So what's the very next section is part 3, the statement of program accomplishments. So this is just sort of, you know, this is what we did this year. So let's scroll down. A checklist of required schedules.
Okay.
You know, again, that's, you know, you're probably going to scroll through that too. Then we're going to get statements regarding IRS filings and tax compliance. Did you do this? Did you not do this? What they do ask a question in here, if you have any employees serving overseas, and typically they say no. I've noticed that Church Militant or St. Michael's Media says no, even though, you know, Dr. Jules Gomez is serving in Italy, which always seemed odd to me. Governance, management, and disclosure. Okay, now here are a bunch of very interesting questions. Look at 7B. Are any governance decisions of the reserves to or subject to the approval of members, stockholders, or so they get into all kinds of things about governance in this. They ask a whole bunch of questions about that. I mention that only to say the government is interested in the organization's governance. And there's a whole section.
Well, number 8, did the organization
contemporaneously document the meetings
held or written actions undertaken year by year? And they said yes.
Yep.
And each committee with authority to act, and they said yes. And we know they didn't hold meetings. Section B is policies.
Did the organization have a written whistleblower policy?
No, they sure didn't. And you got shot down by Simon Rafe when you approached him about that.
Yep. So you can see it. And so I point that out. They don't have to have, you're not required, but they ask about it. They ask about it. All right. So then we go to where are we? 7, compensation. This is where a lot of people like to go, this section, the compensation section.
Okay.
Because you can see the salaries of everybody. The end of 2022, Michael Voris was making more than 6 figures because you add both the 98,000 plus this other kinds of compensation. Perhaps he was getting a housing allowance or something like that. And then you see what other people are making.
Yeah,
Simon's right up there with him.
Oh yeah, Simon, that just blew my mind, making almost 87,000 a year. Susan Vance, blew my mind too. And they're both listed as senior executive producer, director. And Susan Vance, who's in charge of fundraising, and they had very little in fundraising, made 65,000 plus another 10,000.
Yeah. Yeah. But notice Phil Hoppel is making more than her,
Yeah, that's incredible as well.
And notice that, this amazes me. Notice that Susan was making more than Christine Niles.
I know. Yeah.
That's shocking.
That was shocking because I'm not really, well, I won't say it. I don't know what Susan did other than she was in charge of fundraising. And it is shocking that she made more than an investigative reporter.
And then, I just feel like,
I was surprised to see Mary McCann's income too at 55,000, 56,000 almost, because she was administrative duties. And that income is more than most reporters and editors were making.
Yeah.
Am I right?
Yeah. I believe so. I believe so. It's more than I made.
It's a lot more than I made, I'll tell you that.
Yeah. This is a section that if you're looking into another nonprofit organization and you want to see the compensation for top executives. So that's an interesting section. Let's go ahead, keep scrolling.
Well, let me ask you this.
Oh, sure.
Compared to the other nonprofits that you have reviewed and worked for, is this salary in line? Is it not enough? Is it too much? What's your overall impression?
It's low.
It is low. Okay. All right.
For everybody. For everybody.
Yeah, that's good to know.
Notice section B, independent contractors. Okay. Now, these are independent contractors who receive over $100,000. Okay. They don't have any, but they did have independent contractors and they made quite a bit of money, I believe. So one of them was their plan giving guy, and then they had a marketing guy. But neither one of them, thank you. It's good to know. Neither one of them made $100,000 or more.
I was an independent contractor because they couldn't figure out how to add me in as an employee because I worked in a different state. So I was a 1099 up until March of 2022. Well, I was told that it was Indiana was too complicated but they finally figured it out after about 5 months into my employment.
Yeah. So then you'll notice that, like, for example, part 8, this is like detailed information about the revenue. Okay, if they were to give it, but or if they had, a lot of times there can be detail in there. So keep scrolling, and then part 9 is detail of expenses. So here you see a little more information about expenses.
So their gross sales of inventory wasn't very much.
No,
And their legal settlements, $5,000. I wonder who that is.
Yeah. Yeah. There it is.
Yep, there it is.
So this is, information about their expenses. And so you can see the compensation and salaries and so on, their payroll taxes. Look at their legal. Look at 11B. So you've got a lot of legal expenses. Then look at information technology, number 14.
Whoa. So that is total expenses is a little over $500,000 in information technology.
I have no idea if that makes sense or not. It seems like a lot of money.
It does for that size of business. It sure does. And their fundraising shows only 51,000. 100 management and general expenses 116,000, and program service expenses is 406,000. Wow, that is high. So this is where folks, they get their total functional expenses as $5,059,000. So about $5 million in total functional expenses.
Yeah.
Okay. So now we go to the balance sheet.
Yeah, which is, this is where you see the assets and stuff, land, buildings, so you can see the assets there, the value of the assets.
So the land and buildings are at just a little over 3 million.
And notice, look at number 1, cash, non-interest bearing. Okay, so they've got, at the beginning of the year, they have $500,000 sitting in cash. it's not even in a money market account.
Yeah, that would have been, and then it's down to 200,000. And they could have been earning some money on that $500,000.
It's a little bit, maybe it's hard to fault them for that. This is where you need the finance expert, but somebody who was an expert in this sort of thing would say, hey, let's at least make a few extra dollars on that, or better than nothing, which is what they got. So all I'm trying to point out is you see the detail. So on page 1, there's a summary, but then each one of the parts, goes into much more detail about how did they get to that number. And so you can kind of drill down a little bit and get a little more information.
So here it shows investments, publicly traded, zip, investment, other securities, zip, investments, program related, zip.
Yeah, they're just not doing anything investment wise. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not a very sophisticated organization financially. And back to operating at a deficit, when you are a nonprofit organization and you're operating at a deficit, about the only thing you can do is to cut expenses, and to generate more contributions. Okay. Well, now that's because of, all this hubbub about Michael having to resign and, what's come out about the board. Now they have the hope of, really boosting donations is greatly diminished. So to navigate their way out of this deficit is going to be extremely difficult. It would take a very clever person financially to maneuver them out of this. I'm not saying it can't be done. It's just, it'll be drastic though, probably. So those are the main things that I think people should look at. It's not, in some ways, it's really not rocket science. Just looking at that very first page, you can see a lot.
Let's go to the snapshot.
Yeah, that's so handy that they do that. They show those graphs.
So in 2011, their revenue was not even $500,000. And 2021 and 2022 was pretty even, with revenue about almost 5 million.
Yeah. I mean, you can really see them ramping up.
So I really like the snapshot that they do here. You can apply what we went through with St. Michael's Media to go back and look at Church Militant. So Christine, with the few minutes we have left, why don't you talk about what's a healthy nonprofit versus a non-healthy nonprofit?
Well, I think one of the first signs of a healthy nonprofit is they're going to have that 990 as up to date as possible posted right on their website. Now, it's true, we can go other places and find it, but to just put it out there, make it easy for people to look at, that's the sign of a healthy nonprofit. Another sign, of course, would be that they have strong governance, that they have independent board members, that they are, and so having some sort of audit procedure, even if you couldn't do an independent audit, if you had some sort of statement on your website about, that you do an annual review, or, or maybe some statement from the CFO about, just their summary of the year. These are some of the problems we saw. This is how we're planning to address that, and so on. Just some communication with donors about the financial health of the organization. Because the thing is, most donors, if they're giving to your organization, it's because they like you. And you can have a misstep as long as you tell people about it and show that you're addressing it. So having a deficit year, that doesn't have to be horrible. All you have to do is tell people we're in a deficit this year because we had a major roofing problem. There was a completely unexpected expense, and we expect to be able to bring that, into line over the next 12 months or 24 months, or, whatever it is. So I would say those, that, and, having cash reserve on hand, it's just like your own personal budgeting. You know how they tell you, well, you need to have, 6 months of your salary saved, and set aside for an emergency. Well, this is the same situation for a nonprofit organization. So those are a few of the things.
And to be fair to Church Militant, we don't know, as former staffers, or maybe you do, Christine, we don't know how they communicated to the donors, and maybe they did communicate these things to the donors, but it wasn't shared with the employees if they did. Do you know anything?
And I guess you mean privately. They may have shared some of this privately.
Correct.
Well, what I'm talking about is making all of this information public right on your website.
Yes, that's a good business practice. Actually, it's a best business practice for nonprofits.
Yeah.
Because I know several that I follow do that. So what suggestions would you have for Church Militant moving forward?
Oh, I actually gave that some thought, like if I were there, and if I were, like their chief fundraiser, what would I be recommending? Well, first of all, the board, as I've been saying, the entire board needs to resign. They need to recruit a brand new board. They need to have new management. if they were to do that, they might have a hope of being able to tell people we are completely humbled and we are, instigating all new procedures. It would take very radical change, very radical change.
Okay. Any final thoughts before we close?
Before you invest heavily in an organization, just take a moment and go out there and just nose around, in their 990, And then if you have questions, call them and ask the question.
Yes, absolutely. And folks, it goes without saying, we need to pray for Michael Vors. We need to pray for Church Militant and the staff that remains. But we also really need to pray for the former employees of Church Militant, many of which have not been employed yet since their layoff back in March of last year, and of course the recent layoffs that happened, during the holidays. So, if you would please pray for all of those people that are without jobs at Church Militant. All right, Christine, I've got my final words coming up, so just stay in the studio, okay?
I'll be happy to. Thank you, Christine.
I appreciate your time. Okay, folks, I hope this answers some of the questions that the donors had. And I know I've gotten so many emails about what's next, what they should look for. Don't hesitate to contact Church Militant by phone and pick up the phone and call them and ask them directly. We have limited information because we no longer work there. And I don't, as I have said in other podcasts, I don't want to throw out information and sensationalize it all just to get it out there. Unless it's sourced by two sources, I don't bring it to you. And I can tell you, not many people out there will do that. They're happy to give all kinds of rumors and gossip that they know nothing about. But keep Church Militant in your prayers, and especially Michael Vors. And if you want to sign up for my email list, I will put it in the description area below. And I will also post how you can become a part of the private members only Facebook group, where I plan to have live stream videos and more information on how to grow spiritually, and on the course, Your Eternal Life Plan. So be sure to check that out in the description area below. Because remember, everyone, eternal life is forever. Got a plan? God bless.